You've been lied to about kindness. For years, maybe decades, you've been told that being a good person means saying yes, means giving without limits, means never disappointing anyone, means putting everyone else first, always without exception. And you believed it. You made it your religion. You sacrificed your time, your energy, your dreams, your peace, all in the name of being kind. But here's the truth nobody wants to tell you. Some of the attitudes you think are kindness are actually mental prisons, invisible chains, beautiful lies wrapped in noble intentions that are slowly destroying your mind, your potential, and your destiny. The Jewish sages understood something most people will never grasp. There is a fundamental difference between true kindness and the false kindness that keeps you small, trapped, and perpetually exhausted. The Talmud doesn't teach blind generosity. It teaches wisdom. It teaches discernment. It teaches that the person who cannot say no is not kind. They are afraid. And fear, disguised as virtue, is one of the most dangerous traps your mind can fall into. Right now, you might be living 5 specific behaviors that everyone praises. Your family celebrates them. Your friends admire them. Society calls you selfless, generous, humble. But deep in your soul, you feel drained, empty, frustrated. You give and give and give, but nothing grows. Your relationships aren't healthier. Your finances aren't better. Your inner peace isn't deeper. Something is wrong, but you can't name it. That's because you're caught in what the ancient wisdom calls chesed, shel, sheker. False kindness. Kindness that doesn't come from abundance, but from fear of rejection. Kindness that doesn't build, but enables. Kindness that doesn't heal, but postpones necessary pain. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the 5 attitudes that seem like kindness, but are actually mental traps. Not from psychology books, not from modern self-help, but from the Torah, the Talmud, Pirkei Avot, and the Kabbalah. Ancient codes that have guided the Jewish people through thousands of years of survival, prosperity, and transformation. These aren't theories. These are spiritual laws, cause and effect principles that operate whether you believe in them or not. And when you understand them, everything changes. Your relationships change, your decisions change, your bank account changes, your legacy changes. Because the mind that cannot distinguish true kindness from false kindness will always be poor. Poor in money, poor in time, poor in energy, poor in peace. But the mind that learns these 5 distinctions, that mind becomes free, prosperous, powerful, not in an arrogant way, in a responsible way, in a generational way. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which attitudes to abandon, which mental patterns to break, which beliefs about kindness are keeping you trapped in cycles you've been repeating for years. And most importantly, you'll understand the Jewish mental framework that separates those who break free from those who stay stuck forever. This is not about becoming selfish. This is about becoming wise. This is not about stopping giving. This is about giving from the right place, in the right way, with the right boundaries. This is about transforming your mind so your kindness actually creates the results you were promised it would create. So if you're ready to stop being exhausted by your own goodness, if you're ready to see the traps you've been walking into with your eyes closed, if you're ready to learn what the sages knew about the mind that most people will never discover, then take a moment right now and subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from, because this wisdom is crossing borders, generations, and belief systems. Let's build this community of people who refuse to stay trapped in beautiful lies. Now let's begin with the first uncomfortable truth. Most people never realize they're trapped because their trap looks like a virtue. Think about it. If your prison was made of greed, you'd recognize it. If your chains were made of anger, you'd feel them. But when your cage is built from kindness, from selflessness, from humility, you defend it, you protect it, you even teach it to your children. The Jewish sages teach something radical in Pirkei Avot. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? Most people only remember the second part. They obsess over not being selfish, but they completely ignore the first part, the part that says your first responsibility is to yourself, not in a narcissistic way, in a foundational way. Imagine a farmer who gives away all his seeds to hungry neighbors. Beautiful, right? Generous, right? But next season, he has no harvest. Now he's hungry too. Now everyone is hungry. That farmer didn't practice kindness. He practiced foolishness, disguised as kindness. The Torah teaches this through the concept of a field. You don't harvest the corners of your field. You leave them for the poor. But you do harvest the middle. You do plant. You do protect your land. You do ensure there will be a harvest next year, because sustainable kindness requires a sustainable source. Your mind is that field. Your energy is that field. Your time is that field. Your bank account is that field. When you give from depletion, you're not being kind. You're being reckless. And recklessness always creates more problems than it solves. But here's the trap. The world rewards your exhaustion. People love when you say yes to everything, when you cancel your plans for theirs, when you lend money you can't afford to lend, when you take on their emotional burdens. They call you a saint, they call you selfless, and you become addicted to that validation. You become dependent on being needed. Your identity gets wrapped up in being the person who never says no, who never sets boundaries, who never disappoints anyone. So when someone finally asks you to choose yourself, your mind screams, "That's selfish, that's cold, that's not who I am." But the Talmud asks, who is wise? The one who foresees consequences. And the consequence of false kindness is always the same: resentment, exhaustion, poverty, broken relationships, unfulfilled potential. The Kabbalah explains it through the principle of vessels and light. Light is infinite, but the vessel determines how much light you can hold. If your vessel has no bottom, if it has no boundaries, the light just pours through. Nothing is contained. Nothing is multiplied. Nothing transforms. You were not created to be a broken vessel. You were created to receive, to hold, to contain, and then to give from overflow, not from emptiness. This is where most people's mentality breaks. They believe kindness means giving until you have nothing left, but Jewish wisdom teaches the opposite. It teaches that the person who gives everything loses the ability to give anything. There's a story in the Talmud about a man who wanted to give all his wealth to charity. The rabbis stopped him. They said, "Give a fifth, not everything." Why? Because they understood sustainable impact. They understood that today's generosity must not create tomorrow's dependency. Your mind operates the same way. When you adopt attitudes that seem kind but drain you, you're creating a future version of yourself who will have nothing to offer, not to others, not even to yourself. The 5 attitudes we're about to explore all share one thing in common. They look beautiful on the surface, but underneath they're eroding your foundation. They're creating cracks in your vessel. They're teaching your mind that your value comes from self-abandonment, and a mind trained in self-abandonment can never build generational wealth, can never create lasting peace, can never fulfill its purpose, because purpose requires strength, and strength requires boundaries, and boundaries require the courage to be misunderstood. Let me show you how this works. The Torah begins with a revolutionary statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But before the creation of anything physical, the Kabbalah teaches there was something else. Tzimtzum, contraction. God, who is infinite, contracted his light to create space for something else to exist. Without that contraction, without that boundary, creation would be impossible. This is the first lesson about mentality that most people miss. Creation requires limits. You cannot create a life of meaning without boundaries. You cannot build prosperity without saying no to things that drain you. You cannot fulfill your purpose while trying to be everything to everyone. The Jewish concept of free will, Bechira, is built on this foundation. You are not a puppet. You are not a victim of circumstances. You were given a mind capable of choice. But with that gift comes absolute responsibility. Pirkei Avot teaches, you are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. This means you are responsible for your portion, not everyone's portion, not every problem, not every need. Your portion. When you take on more than your portion, you don't become righteous, you become overwhelmed. And an overwhelmed person cannot think clearly, cannot decide wisely, cannot act effectively. The sages understood that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your mind, and the quality of your mind is determined by what you allow in and what you keep out. This is why the Torah is obsessive about boundaries. Boundaries between the sacred and the mundane, between Shabbat and the weak, between kosher and non-kosher, between the holy and the ordinary. These aren't arbitrary rules, they're mental training. They teach your mind that distinction is sacred, that separation is necessary, that not everything belongs in the same space. Now apply this to kindness, true kindness, what the Torah calls chesed, and is rooted in strength. It comes from abundance. It's strategic. It builds. It empowers the receiver without creating dependency. False kindness, chesed shel sheker, comes from weakness, from fear of conflict, from need for approval, from inability to disappoint. It drains the giver. It disempowers the receiver. It creates resentment on both sides. The Talmud says, he who is compassionate to the cruel will ultimately be cruel to the compassionate. This is a mental law. When you show false kindness to those who manipulate you, who take advantage, who refuse to grow, you are stealing resources from those who truly deserve your help, including yourself. God does not reward good intentions. God rewards alignment with spiritual laws. This is hard for people to accept because modern culture teaches that intentions are everything. But Jewish wisdom teaches something different. Intentions matter, but results reveal truth. If your kindness is creating worse outcomes, if people are more dependent, not more empowered, if you're more exhausted, not more fulfilled, then your kindness is not aligned with divine law. It's aligned with fear. And fear, no matter how it's dressed up, always leads to chaos. The principle of cause and effect is unbreakable. The Talmud teaches that every action creates a chain of consequences that extends far beyond what you can see. When you plant a seed of false kindness, when you enable someone who should face natural consequences, when you sacrifice your peace to avoid uncomfortable conversations, you are setting in motion a chain that will come back to you, not as punishment, as education. Because the universe is not interested in making you comfortable. The universe is interested in making you wise. And wisdom begins when you stop confusing pleasing people with serving God. When you stop confusing avoiding conflict with keeping peace. When you stop confusing self-abandonment with selflessness. God does not need you to be depleted. God needs you to be a vessel, a strong vessel, a vessel with boundaries, a vessel that can receive, hold, multiply, and then give from overflow. This is the mentality that changes everything. This is the foundation the 5 traps are designed to destroy. Now let me show you what this looks like in a real life. Her name was Rachel, 43 years old, single mother of 2, working 2 jobs, and everyone in her community called her a saint. Rachel was the person you called when you needed help, when you needed money, when you needed someone to watch your kids, when you needed a ride, a meal, a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on. She never said no, ever. Her friends admired her, her church praised her, even her children, though they rarely saw her, knew their mother was special, selfless, the kindest person anyone had ever met. But Rachel had a secret she told no one. She was drowning. Her bank account was always negative, not because she didn't work hard. She worked 70 hours a week, but because she kept lending money to people who never paid her back. She kept covering expenses for family members who, temporarily, needed help. She kept saying yes to financial requests, even when saying yes meant she couldn't pay her own rent. Her health was deteriorating, headaches, insomnia, digestive problems. Her doctor said it was stress. But Rachel didn't have time to reduce stress. People needed her. Her children were struggling. Her daughter was failing school. Her son was angry, distant, pulling away. But when Rachel tried to spend time with them, someone always called with an emergency. And she always went, because that's what good people do. One night, sitting in her car at 2 a.m. after driving a friend to the airport, Rachel broke. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. Exhausted, empty, resentful. She realized she hated the very people she was sacrificing everything for. She hated them for taking, but more than that. She hated herself for giving. This wasn't kindness anymore. This was a prison. The next morning, Rachel called her cousin Daniel, who had recently become more religious, studying Jewish texts with a local rabbi. She didn't know why she called him. They hadn't spoken in months, but something in her knew she needed a different perspective. Daniel listened. Then he said something that changed everything. "Rachel, do you know what the Talmud says about a person who gives away all their possessions?" She didn't. It says they have sinned, not against others, against themselves, against God. Rachel was shocked. "But isn't giving good?" "Giving is good," Daniel said. "But giving everything is not giving. It's self-destruction, and self-destruction is not a mitzvah." He told her about a teaching from Pirkei Avot. "If I am not for myself, who will be for me?" He explained that Jewish wisdom doesn't glorify martyrdom. It glorifies sustainable impact. It teaches that you cannot pour from an empty vessel, that the person who destroys themselves in the name of helping others is not helping anyone. They're creating future chaos. "You think you're being kind," Daniel said gently, "but you're actually being cruel. Cruel to your children who need a present mother, cruel to yourself who deserves rest, and cruel to the people you're enabling because you're robbing them of the chance to grow." Rachel felt something crack open inside her. Tears came, not sad tears, angry tears. She had been taught her whole life that sacrifice was love, that boundaries were selfish, that saying no meant you didn't care, and she had built her entire identity around being the person who never said no. But now she saw the cost. Her children were paying, her health was paying, her future was paying. Daniel introduced her to Rabbi Goldstein, who began teaching her the principle of gevel, boundary. The rabbi explained that God himself operates with boundaries. The ocean stops at the shore, the seasons change at their appointed time, even miracles follow laws. "Your kindness needs a boundary," the rabbi said. "Not to limit your heart, to protect it, so it can keep beating." Over the next year, Rachel began the hardest work of her life, learning to say no. The first time she told a friend she couldn't lend money, her hands shook. The friend got angry, called her selfish, stopped speaking to her, and Rachel learned something crucial. The people who benefited from her lack of boundaries didn't want her to have boundaries. The second time, a family member asked her to cover rent just this once. Rachel said no. The family member cried, accused her of not caring, made her feel guilty for weeks. And Rachel learned false kindness creates false relationships. Slowly, painfully, she started restructuring her life. She stopped working 2 jobs and focused on one. She started sleeping. She started attending her children's school events. She started saving money instead of giving it all away. Her social circle shrank. People who loved her for what she did disappeared, but people who loved her for who she was, they stayed, and new people, healthier people, started appearing. Her daughter's grades improved. Her son started talking to her again. Her bank account, for the first time in years, had a positive balance. But the biggest change was internal. Rachel realized she had been addicted to being needed. Her worth was tied to her usefulness. When people didn't need her, she felt worthless. So she had unconsciously created a life where people always needed her. The Kabbalah calls this ratzon lekabel, the desire to receive, but distorted. Receiving validation through giving. True giving, the rabbi taught, comes from ratzon lahashpia, the desire to flow, to give from overflow. To give because your vessel is full, not because you're trying to fill an internal void. Rachel was 51 now, 8 years after that breakdown in her car. She wasn't rich. She didn't have a massive social circle, but she had something she never had before: peace. Her children were thriving, her finances were stable, her health had returned, and her relationships, though fewer, were real. She had learned the difference between kindness and the trap of false kindness, and that made all the difference. Here's the principle Rachel discovered, the same principle the Torah has been teaching for thousands of years. Kindness without wisdom is not kindness. It's enabling. The Hebrew word for kindness is chesed, but chesed in Torah is never separate from gevurah. Strength. Boundary, discernment. True chesed is balanced. It knows when to give and when to withhold, when to help and when to let someone face consequences, when to say yes and when to say no. The Kabbalah teaches that God created the world through a balance of chesed and gevurah. Too much chesed, and everything dissolves into chaos. Too much gevurah, and everything becomes rigid and dead. Creation requires both. Your life requires both. The 5 attitudes you're about to learn all represent unbalanced chesed: kindness that has lost its strength, generosity that has abandoned wisdom, selflessness that has forgotten the self. And when chesed operates without gevurah, it becomes destructive. Why? Because true kindness empowers. It helps people stand on their own. It creates independence, growth, strength, but false kindness creates dependency. It keeps people weak. It robs them of the opportunity to struggle, to learn, to become capable. The Talmud tells of a man who would catch fish and give them to the poor every day. A wise rabbi saw this and said, "You are wasting your time. Teach them to fish." This is the principle most people miss. The highest form of kindness is not doing things for people. It's empowering them to do things for themselves. When you constantly rescue people from consequences, you're not helping them. You're crippling them. You're teaching them they don't need to be responsible because someone will always save them. When you always say yes to requests that drain you, you're not being generous. You're being dishonest, because eventually you will resent them. You will burn out. You will disappear. And they will be left worse off than if you had said no from the beginning. Pirkei Avot teaches, "Who is wealthy? The one who is satisfied with their portion." This applies to giving too. The person who gives beyond their portion is not generous. They are violating spiritual law. They are taking from their future to please people in the present. And that debt always comes due. God multiplies aligned action. When you give from overflow, from a place of strength and wisdom, God multiplies that gift. The receiver is blessed. You are blessed. The impact extends for generations. But when you give from depletion, from fear, from inability to set boundaries, you're asking God to multiply dysfunction. And God does not bless dysfunction. He allows it to collapse so you can rebuild on a better foundation. This is why so many kind people are poor, why so many generous people are exhausted, why so many selfless people end up alone and resentful, not because kindness is wrong, but because they were never taught the difference between true kindness and its counterfeit. The 5 attitudes we're about to explore are counterfeits. They look like the real thing. They feel noble. They get praised by society. But they violate the spiritual laws of sustainable giving. They destroy the vessel in the name of sharing the light. And when your vessel is destroyed, you have nothing left to share. The Jewish path is not about being nice. It's about being wise. It's about building a life that can sustain kindness for decades, for generations, not just for a season. Now let's identify the 5 specific traps. First principle, saying yes when you should say no. This seems like flexibility, like being helpful, like being available. But the Torah teaches that every yes to the wrong thing is a no to the right thing. When you say yes to watching someone's children when you need to rest, you're saying no to your health. When you say yes to lending money you can't afford to lend, you're saying no to your family's security. When you say yes to taking on someone else's emotional burden when you're already overwhelmed, you're saying no to your own peace. The common error people make, they believe that saying no is cruel, that disappointing someone is a sin, that being unavailable makes you a bad person. But the Talmud teaches, it is not incumbent upon you to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Your work, your portion, not everyone's work, not everyone's portion. The long-term impact of always saying yes is devastating. Your life becomes a reaction to other people's requests instead of a pursuit of your purpose. Your time, which is your most valuable resource, gets allocated by whoever asks loudest, not by what matters most. Practical application. Before saying yes to any request, ask yourself 3 questions from Jewish wisdom. Is this my portion or someone else's? Am I giving from overflow or from depletion? Will this yes serve my purpose or distract from it? If you can't answer these with clarity, the answer is not yes. The answer is, let me think about it, or I need to check my capacity, or simply no. No is a complete sentence. No does not require justification. No is a boundary, and boundaries are sacred. Second principle, taking responsibility for other people's emotions. This looks like empathy, like being caring, like being emotionally intelligent, but there's a difference between compassion and codependency. Compassion says, I see your pain. I'm here for you. What do you need? Codependency says, your pain is my responsibility. I must fix it. I can't be okay unless you're okay. The Kabbalah teaches the concept of ratzon and kli, desire and vessel. Every soul has its own desires and its own vessel. You cannot experience someone else's journey for them. You cannot grow for them. You cannot heal for them. When you take responsibility for how other people feel, you're violating a spiritual boundary. You're trying to control something that is not yours to control. And control rooted in fear always creates chaos. The common error, people think that if someone is upset because of their boundary, they did something wrong. So they apologize, they back down, they sacrifice their needs to restore peace. But the Torah teaches each person will bear their own burden. This means each person is responsible for their emotional response to reality. You can be kind. You can be respectful, but you cannot manage their feelings. The long-term impact of emotional codependency is exhaustion and resentment. You become a hostage to other people's moods. You cannot make decisions based on wisdom because you're too busy managing reactions. Your life becomes small because you're afraid to do anything that might upset anyone. Practical application. When someone is upset about a boundary you set, practice this response. I understand you're disappointed. I care about you, and my decision stands. You can acknowledge their feelings without changing your boundary. You can have compassion without having codependency. This is what the sages mean by speaking truth with your neighbor. Truth with love, but truth nonetheless. Third principle, avoiding necessary conflict. This looks like keeping the peace, like being mature, like taking the high road. But Pirkei Avot warns, in a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. Sometimes kindness requires confrontation. Sometimes love requires difficult conversations. Sometimes peace requires going through conflict, not around it. The Torah is full of stories where righteous people had to confront wrong. Abraham argued with God. Moses confronted Pharaoh. The prophets confronted kings. Silence in the face of wrong is not peace, it's cowardice. The common error: people think that avoiding conflict means they're spiritual, that letting things slide makes them evolved. That confrontation is always aggressive, always negative, always destructive. But the Talmud distinguishes between machlokes leshem shamayim, conflict for the sake of heaven, and machlokes shelo leshem shamayim, conflict for ego. The first is necessary and holy. The second is destructive and forbidden. When someone is taking advantage of you, when someone is violating your boundaries repeatedly, when someone is harming themselves or others through their behavior, avoiding confrontation is not kindness, it's enabling, it's complicity. The long-term impact of conflict avoidance is poisoned relationships and internal resentment. Problems that could have been solved with one honest conversation become festering wounds. People who could have changed with clear feedback continue in destructive patterns, and you become bitter, exhausted, and disconnected from your own truth. Practical application. The Jewish path teaches tochacha, reproof with love. When you need to confront, do it privately, do it respectfully, do it with the intention of helping, not hurting, but do it. Say, I need to talk to you about something uncomfortable because I value our relationship and I can't continue like this. Then speak your truth, set your boundary, and let the other person decide how they'll respond. You are not responsible for their response. You are responsible for your integrity. Now we come to the principle most people reject, the one that feels wrong, the one that goes against everything modern culture teaches about kindness. Giving to people who refuse to help themselves is not kindness, it's sin. The Talmud is explicit about this. One who is compassionate to the cruel will ultimately be cruel to the compassionate. This means when you enable people who are capable but unwilling to change, when you rescue people from consequences they need to face, when you give resources to those who waste them instead of those who would steward them well, you are not being kind. You are being unjust. You are stealing from the truly needy to subsidize the manipulative. You are teaching people that irresponsibility has no consequences. You are participating in their self-destruction. Why do people reject this principle? Because it requires discernment, it requires judgment, and modern culture has taught that any form of judgment is wrong. But Jewish wisdom teaches the opposite. It teaches that discernment is a mitzvah, that distinguishing between those who deserve help and those who are exploiting help is not cruel. It's necessary. The Torah commands, "You shall surely help." But it also commands, "You shall not put a stumbling block before the blind." Giving money to someone who will use it for destruction is putting a stumbling block before them. Enabling someone's laziness is robbing them of the dignity of work. Maimonides, the great Jewish sage, taught 8 levels of charity. The highest level, helping someone become self-sufficient. The lowest, giving grudgingly to someone who doesn't even need it. This principle requires patience because results are slow. When you stop enabling, people get angry. They accuse you of changing, of becoming hard, of not caring. They try to manipulate you back into the old pattern, and this is where most people give up. They cannot withstand the social pressure. They cannot handle being misunderstood. They cannot tolerate the discomfort of watching someone face consequences. But the Kabbalah teaches that the most profound kindness often looks like cruelty in the moment, like a parent who doesn't rescue their adult child from debt, like a friend who refuses to keep lending money to someone who never pays it back, like a spouse who finally says, "Change, or I'm leaving." These moments feel brutal, they feel uncompassionate, but they are moments when Gevurah, strength, is serving chesed, kindness. By creating the conditions for real transformation, the person who abandons this principle early will watch the people they love spiral deeper into dysfunction. They will give and give and give, and nothing will improve. In fact, things will get worse, but the person who holds this boundary, who loves people enough to let them face reality, who refuses to participate in enabling, they create space for miracles, not immediate miracles, slow miracles. The miracle of someone finally taking responsibility, the miracle of growth born from struggle. This is the kindness that changes generations. So here's where you stand right now. You've seen the 5 traps. You've seen how attitudes that seem like kindness can actually be prisons. You've seen the difference between true chesed and false chesed, between wisdom and enabling, between strength and weakness disguised as virtue. And now you have a choice. You can go back to the way things were. You can keep saying yes when you should say no. You can keep taking responsibility for other people's emotions. You can keep avoiding necessary conflict. You can keep giving to people who refuse to help themselves. You can keep believing that self-sacrifice equals love. Or you can step into a different paradigm, the Jewish paradigm, the one that says your first responsibility is to become a strong vessel so you have something to give. The one that says boundaries are sacred, not selfish. The one that says sustainable kindness requires wisdom, discernment, and the courage to be misunderstood. Imagine your life 5 years from now if you make this shift. You wake up rested because you stopped saying yes to things that drain you. Your bank account is growing because you stopped funding other people's irresponsibility. Your children respect you because you're present, not exhausted. Your relationships are real because they're built on honesty, not people-pleasing. You're not surrounded by as many people, but the people around you are different. They're healthier, they're reciprocal, they're growth-oriented because you stopped attracting takers and started attracting builders. Your mind is clear. Your conscience is clean. Your energy is focused on your portion, your purpose, your legacy. This is not a fantasy. This is what happens when you align your kindness with spiritual law, when you stop operating from fear and start operating from wisdom. The sages teach, who is honored, the one who honors others. But you cannot honor others if you have dishonored yourself through self-abandonment. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot build others up if your own foundation is crumbling. The transformation starts in your mind with one decision, one boundary, one no. And from that one decision, everything changes. Before you go, I want to invite you again. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. This community is growing, and we're going deeper into this wisdom together, week after week, video after video. Join us. Comment below and let me know which of these 5 traps hit you hardest. Share your country. Let's connect. Because this journey is not meant to be walked alone. May your kindness be wise. May your boundaries be strong. May your mind be clear and your legacy be blessed. Now go and choose truth over comfort.